I just want to welcome you all. This is we get the light back and we've got the thread of spring right here. So I'm excited. This is our third artist talk for this new year. And it's my great pleasure to introduce Iva Fabrikant. Shortly after completing her BFA at Boston University, she applied and was accepted to the Carving Studio and Sculpture Center resident internship, and has continued to stay in touch with us through our residency program and just exhibiting in the state with us. So it's been a real pleasure. She's also shown her work at the Clay Studio in Philadelphia and at the Casket Arts Complex in Minneapolis, and the Philadelphia Sculpture Gym, where she's shown some small works, and Project Space Gallery in Wilmington, as well as the Vermont Arts Council Sculpture Garden in Montpelier, Vermont. She has attended residencies at the Vermont Studio Center and at Franconia Sculpture Park, also collaborations with Automatic Arts in Philadelphia, an exhibition of temporary installations for Nice and Fresh, a series of pop-up contemporary theater, dance, and art performances in the Mount Airy neighborhood of Philadelphia. I found your work experience pretty fascinating, and working for Ray King, who is a glass fabricator, and also working with youth at the Philadelphia Mural Arts Program, and working with glass mosaic artist Amélie Ledoux in Philadelphia Mural Arts Program. I know there's a lot of work that you're going to present here that sort of fills that gap, and really look forward to hearing more about it. So let's share screen.
Cool. Am I good to go? Yeah, I'll start with like a little introduction, and then I can start with the presentation. So my name's Eva. So I guess I would say my work seeks to be a walk through an alien natural history museum. I'm inspired by like natural forms that I see and that I draw around me, science fiction stories, electronic music, and repetition, and just wacky and fantastic objects that I see around me in general. I use materials upcycled from my day-to-day life, so trash not typically considered as a genesis for finely crafted work. I want to entice viewers with like fleshy forms that are interrupted by rigid lines, folds, creases, and intricate dot patterns, and shapes that look kind of mysterious and familiar at the same time, and shapes that kind of just make you want to come up and touch them, even though maybe you shouldn't. I work right now mostly with recycled paper pulp, but I've worked a lot with stone in the past, and it's been really influential in my approach to sculpting and craft. So an overwhelming part of my process focuses on play and then just gradual refinement towards a shape that I think is fun and funny and interesting and detailed. So I really like playing with a material, understanding its limitations and my limitations in relation to the material, and letting the material push back on my initial idea and making decisions partly on this pushback that I encounter as I'm working. Cool, so I'll share this. Cool. So I wanted to begin with some of the first marble pieces I made when I got to the carving studio a long time ago when I interned. I came to stone carving because I've been having a lot of anxiety about painting and how to paint, and I've been making a lot of figure drawings at the time in like pen and pencil. I had this really great sculpture professor, Batu Siharlidze, who sold stone carving to me by noticing that I was really comfortable with drawing and making a lot of drawings with dark layered hatch marks that were like pushing into the paper. And he said, you know, you could translate this like really fluidly into stone sculpture because you're kind of pushing and subtracting into the form all the way around. And I found that to be like a really fun and freeing entry point. So when I got to the carving studio, I wanted to play around with the figure drawings that I've been making and these figures and pushing and folding and flattening and curling up the figures that I've been making in maquette form. So I remember I was making this white, flat, curled up figure for the first couple weeks. And then I wanted to try working with this West Rutland blue that everyone had been talking about. And I kind of made a companion piece to go with the first one. I set these pieces out towards the back of the quarry in a place where you'd have to suddenly come upon them. I wanted them to be these odd and like kind of silly or absurd creatures that you met while walking in the quarry. This is like a kind of example of some of the drawings I was making. And then I returned to Philadelphia. I moved, I didn't have a studio, and I was trying to find more portable media that I could still mold and mess around with easily, but that was cheap and non-toxic and easy to work with and didn't require like fancy equipment to process. I wanted to continue making work that was full and lively in the same way a figure would be, but which wasn't necessarily like a person anymore. So I hit upon these curl shapes. This is a series that I called like petal curls because they're like if a flower petal like blew itself up and puffed itself up and had an attitude. Unfortunately for me at the time, I was still figuring out my pulp recipe and process, so I was using way too much water, and these forms partly happened because it just took so long to build the shape up and then to sand and build again and try to make the surface somewhat uniform. I took a lot of the concepts that I learned at the carving studio about finishing and closing up forms and applied them to these paperworks. So paper is really porous, and like I said, my recipe wasn't that great. So it was a losing battle because the texture was never consistent, but it was still a really fun challenge. And I feel like it elevated the paper a little bit and made it really fun to work with in the end. Oh, the drawing, pulling in the drawing was part of the surface treatment. So like, here's another example. There were just some surface flaws that I couldn't resolve through sanding. And I thought, hey, this is paper after all. And I love to draw. So why don't I draw on these pieces and kind of highlight what I like about the shapes. This one was another work in the curl series. I call it horned curl, but I also like kind of nicknamed it Piggy. These are creatures now, so I continued to like kind of play with them and fold them and chop them up and put them back together and round them out. On this one, I was using thin layers of tissue to try to even out the surface and make it extra smooth and kind of hide the pulp texture of the work. So I like the ambiguous look of the surface that you couldn't really tell what the material was, even though that kind of changed over time. So as Carol mentioned, I was working for a couple different glass artists at the time. So some glass kind of began to make an appearance in the presentation of the works. This one is just meant to be up on a wall. So I liked having a dark reflective background with a pop of color behind it. I was toying with just how much drawing I could get away with without what I thought might overwhelm the shape itself. So I could go back and forth between thinking I would have to keep the drawing very soft and subtle, and then thinking, hey, I can just go nuts and really use like dark ink and build it up quite a bit. I do always try to build these drawings up very slowly, a lot of times with dots or sometimes like really soft lines. So I don't know how much color might get absorbed or how dramatic the effect will be. So in this piece, I was painting and collaging all over the surface, and it felt like too disjointed and unsupported. And I ended up sanding almost all the drawing down and covering it so that it's only noticeable if you look really closely. This piece is called Elephant Curl, and I just wanted it to be a very fun and funny, like ballooning shape. It looks like it's about to fall over. And then also to balance that kind of silliness with this austere surface and rigid lines and straight flat planes. I never like for these pieces to be all one perfect thing or another. It's a lot more fun for me to find a shape that's a balance of like silly and elegant. And I'm still working with marble a lot of the time, and I was privileged to be able to come back to the carving studio and continue these ideas. So by now it's apparent that I work in series. One piece is always kind of connected to the last one I made. I remember having another teacher that said, like, the way they approached their work was, if I'm not sure that I like something I made or not, I just make it again, and that like gives me a big clue. That really spoke to me, and repetition in one form or another is a huge part of how I get new ideas. So this was I was working with these elliptical forms at the time, and this was a continuation of that. I made this little slug fellow with like ridges and flat planes towards his nose, and just kind of having these interrupting elements in the greater ellipsoid shape. And then again, I figured he needed a big brother piece, especially since I was at the studio and I had an opportunity to make larger work that could live outdoors. And so I was working with what used to be an old stoop of West Rutland marble again, and I wanted to also make another ellipsoid shape with ridges, not a perfect one. So this became a puffy, pillowy altar shape that looked like it was stretching its arms out. And I found this path that runs past the sculpture garden where the piece looked like it was stretching to reach either side of the path. And it was also in a spot where you would have to kind of walk around and come upon it and find it. I've never really been able to work so big that I can completely recreate a space anew and change it drastically. So I like that finding these works still has an impact by letting you have like these quiet moments with the piece as you're walking through this like unique outdoor space. Then I left the carving studio again. I came back and I was working with paper again. This time I began slowly trying to add more color into the work. So at first it was with very subtle layers and not trying to be too loud. The color also had to come from the paper itself. Like in order to get this peachy pink color, I had to just make sure I had pink and orange paper on hand. I was also starting to use inner structures that were made from cut and folded and glued together squares, and they would create these wide cones that would approximate a curved surface. So the next few works are based on these cones that have been chopped up and rearranged one way or another. This is like four cones that have been glued together, essentially. This is one of the first pieces where I realized I could just begin to leave some of the texture of the dried paper pulp. So still doing some sanding here and there, but my recipe was way better. So the consistency was much improved. I also began breaking the work up into separate color blocks and having these kind of very clear-cut transitions. This was a series of pieces called Tri-Flowers, and these are the ones I really thought of as something you'd find like walking in the woods or in a garden on another planet. I also began trying to extend the interrupting elements into these linear protrusions. And I thought I'd share some process photos. These show the sort of nets I was using to build the inner structure. So you can see that this work is mostly made from trash that's been glued together and then, you know, waterproofed to an extent. So I tried to find some process photos of the pulp. Here's how it looks as it's getting like built in some of the smaller pieces. The recipe is really simple. It's just like paper and a binder. You could use it in like a kid's art class. The tricky part comes with your process. So how finely do you grind the paper? Like what kind of paper do you use in your mix? Maybe you mix some sawdust in it. How well do you get rid of the water? When you're at different stages of building the piece, like you want different kind of consistencies for the paper pulp. So it could be coarser towards the beginning, and at the end, I try to grind it very finely so that it like is very smooth when I'm layering it on with a palette knife. So now I've kind of committed to using recycled material for this long. I don't love using stuff like expanding foam or masking tape to build up the form, because for one, I'd have to buy that. And also because I like feeling like the work is truly recycled paperwork, not necessarily like a foam sculpture clad in paper. Also, I think that our materials are just like going to get more and more expensive over time. So I love how accessible this approach is. So I have more material than I know what to do with because I kind of just use the stuff that we throw out at my work every day. This is the third sibling in the series of flower works. So here I'm finally boosting up the color saturation a bit and breaking my own rule and kind of using colored inks in my pulp recipe. I love colors that clash and vibrate against one another. So reds and grays are some of my favorite combinations. This was also a piece where I was kind of like fighting with it for a while and trying to get each section very balanced. And it just wasn't going to happen. So this was an opportunity to say like, hey, these three like kind of puffy triangular sections, they're just not going to agree. So I'm going to like celebrate them and like make it very obvious that they don't agree and have fun with that. I hope this sort of gives an idea of the scale of the works. This is for a show I was preparing last year at Abington Art Center. This piece was also part of that same show. It came from a little scrap of wood that someone threw out at work, and I just layered a bunch of paper pulp on top of it. A little bit more narrative is starting to happen with this. This is kind of more of a landscape. I think of this as like a disembodied like slice of earth with like a beach on top and like a little creature like curled up in the water, like washed up on the beach. So narrative has always been sort of present in the background. It's never been the primary idea behind these pieces, but I do kind of think of stories as I'm working on these. And I've been trying to understand just how important narrative is to me and like what role it plays in the work. And a friend suggested doing some writing about the works, and social media kind of plays a role as well, because when you post pictures of your work, it's fun to leave like a silly story in the description. So I've been like making some little vignettes to go with the works. They're not super important, but it's like kind of a fun detail. So for instance, this piece is called Paw, and I actually got very intense with this green ink when I was kind of finishing the surface. And I actually had to like layer it up quite a bit to tone down the green a little bit, but I came to think of it as like a swamp monster's hand, but like a nice dopey swamp monster who is like your bud. So the vignette that goes with this one is, this is the sleek and pleasantly chubby paw of your amiable neighborhood swamp thing. He sheds and grows a new one every 3 months and thought that this would make for a sweet and personal Christmas present because your friendship is, after all, unique. And then this piece, I was really enjoying the colors while I was working on it, and I came to think of it as this like wacky candy apple. So the story for this one is a little bit long, but I essentially long for a vignette, but I wrote this little story about how I'm asking the apple questions about what kind of candy it's been dipped in, and it gets very insulted with me because apparently like you're not supposed to ask that kind of question. And so I'm trying to ask the internet like what I did wrong and how I can fix it. So I'll finish up with some things that have been going on with my studio recently. So two types of projects usually happen. The first are like works that have been plaguing me forever, like for instance, oh, that's an install shot, sorry. But this is the one I'm talking about. So this like orange spaceship thing, it's based on a similar conical structure to the flowers. It's like, I'm always feel like I'm very close to resolving it, but not quite. There's always like, there's either like too much going on or I don't know, it's just not like balanced enough for me. There's always something off about it. So same with this like robot mask thing. This one is like a little bit more fluid for me. It's like close to completion, but it's not quite there yet. And I kind of come back to it every now and then and I don't know, get new ideas with it over time. And the other pieces I would call like little maintenance pieces or just little maquettes. So kind of ones like this. So I work full time, and so my studio time isn't as consistent as I would love it to be. So I have these like little works that are meant to be like just held and like turned around in your hands and like just messed around with. And these are works that I can come into the studio, like mix up a batch of paper pulp and just begin and get a good chunk of the way through a piece like in one session. And here's like an extra little small piece that is like growing a little bit every now and then. This is also the like companion piece to the little candy apple. Their structures were like made together. But yeah, this is like kind of what I would call a little maintenance piece that's like making its way in the studio currently. And that kind of brings me to the present day. And I guess I would love to take any questions if you have any.
I have a question. I'm curious how you got started using paper and for how long you've been working in this medium.
Yeah, yeah, I guess, yeah, like what I was saying when I essentially, oh gosh, it's been a good 10 years probably. Pretty much when I got back from the carving studio for the first time in like 2013 about, yeah, I was just looking for a material that would feel like clay that you could kind of mess around with easily, but that didn't like need a lot of processing because I don't know, didn't have a kiln close by. And at the same time, I was doing some after school projects with the mural arts program. And I was trying to think of like, they were mostly like very 2D based. And I was trying to think of like sculptural projects to bring to kids that would be easy for kids to work with. Although over time, like my process has gotten so complicated that I don't know if it would translate very easily to that, but it kind of grew out of that, out of those ideas.
Say you, Jim?
Hi, yes.
Hey.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to thank you very much for sharing your work. I am an artist as well, and I work with paper pulp a little bit, just a little bit, but you've inspired me in such a huge level. I love the color, I love the texture, and I'm really glad that you showed a little bit of the interior, the shell. I was wondering what you were doing with that. But I have a question. Do you always do a sketch before you create a piece of work like what we're looking at right now?
No, I actually don't. I think, yeah, I kind of think of these almost more as sketches sometimes. Yeah, so I do a lot of figure drawing, and it doesn't directly affect the work. I feel like it's a source of like inspiration for me. And we have in Philadelphia this amazing like figure drawing club that I attend called the Plastic Club. And that is kind of where my drawings focus. And those I think feed my ideas, but I actually I don't really plan, like these are all fairly intuitive. I plan some of the structures, the inner structures sometimes, like I know, yeah, I'm gonna start with like these conical structures, but yeah, I don't really sketch out the work before I do them so much. Sometimes I sketch the work as I'm working on it, like if I feel like I'm stuck. But yeah, if we're talking about play versus planning, a lot of these are more like play based.
I was wondering about the, there's just two things. The figures that still have features in your current sculpture. How do you pick, like, you know, even when you transferred from working in stone and then into paper pulp, it seems like these, you know, protrusions or, you know, I think in some of the stone sculpture, they were like almost feet, you know, almost hands, but they're just barely hinting at that. And it seems like it's more about movement, you know, like the one on the end here, you know, is just kind of spreading out like it's about to take off, or it's a little wobbly. And it's like the movement, we don't actually see it, maybe if you went over and tapped it, but it has that kind of lift off. And I'm going to go back to the role of geology or landscape in the kind of, you know, seepage that happens with some of these forms, you know, like they're traversing over terrain and the colors are leading us to, you know, some other segment of it. And so I see those two are like, at least from my perspective, are influences. And you've already acknowledged the figure. And if you could speak a little bit about how you pick out the feature to do that, or features, and then if there is any connection with, you know, kind of geological formations or, you know, sedimentation or something that seems to be part of the language.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, I would say like fluidity for me has always been really important, just because I think when I started making sculpture in college, like we were mostly doing figurative sculpture, and that, I don't know, like for me, I felt like when you're doing figurative work, like you're always going to come up with something interesting, because like the figure, like from far away, it's very striking, but when you come up close, like there are these little details that hold your attention. And like that's kind of a thing I really love about sculpture. And so I was just wanting to do that. I was thinking, like, I know there are ways that you can do that, like without working from a figure, but I really want to maintain that quality. So that's why I want everything to be like very full and like lively looking. I know when I was like taking drawing classes, people were like emphasizing like kind of these flow lines in the forms to me, and I like try to have that quality in the work. And then like the hands and the feet are part of those little details that kind of interrupt the form for me and like create those exciting little moments that hold your attention. So it's all just kind of part of wanting to have something very striking, but which has these like very intimate little details once you come up close to it. Yeah. And then the different textures are just kind of, I would say, like playing with how finished and like different levels of finish in the work. So they're not so much like geologic formations for me as kind of like how much fun can I have, in the same way as like adding these little details. It's kind of how much fun can I have with a variety of textures. I don't know if that does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, it's I think I was seeing, like, especially with the forms that were kind of folding in on themselves and pushing out. I guess I thought of them as forces, kind of formations, and then I guess that led me to the really fine lines that kind of signify sedimentation, accumulation of material.
Yeah.
My 2 cents. But I love the figurative elements a lot, and just kind of looking for them now that I know you work a bit. So it's like, oh, there's one, or so. Yeah, no, thank you. And what about painting? Has that been do you see anything that you carry with you from working two-dimensional in terms of the way you approach color?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't really, yeah. Yeah, I don't really paint anymore. But yeah, it's, I mean, yeah, it does the different like color relationships definitely carry over. I remember when I was painting in college, like I would make these like very close color paintings to begin with, like trying to see how much like form and depth I could create just like by using different like reds layered over top of one another. But then I do remember I was also still experimenting quite a bit with those like clashing color relationships. So those reds against the grays, they were absent for a pretty long time, again because I was just afraid of like bringing too much color in like right away, and I don't know, making it look like just a painting on a shape. So yeah, initially, yes, the color was very limited, and then more recently, I've been like, hey, this is, it is paper after all. This is an opportunity to like, this medium kind of celebrates color, and I think it would be really fun to try to bring more of that in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Are there any other questions? I love it, Eva. I think it's really wonderful to be able to get a little bit of the process of how you got to this point. And there's the figure again. I mean, it's a portrait of sorts, so it's really wonderful.
Yeah, this one is kind of again, like I really love drawing portraits, but they don't really make an appearance in the sculpture, and so it's slowly creeping back in.
Yeah, and it seems to have some kind of Egyptian quality to it for me, you know, just that little thing that's in the opening. You know, it's
Oh, yeah.
the detail. Well, I want to thank you very much for joining us, and just keep up this work. It's really fabulous.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
Do you have any shows that you're planning for in the immediate future?
Yeah, I have one. There's I think this guy, I'm showing this guy in May at the Woodmere Art Museum. I think it opens in May. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah, it's a really nice little local museum in Philadelphia.
More
Yeah, the Woodmere.
Whitmere, okay. Well, we'll add it to you know, just a little promotion for you if you send us the link, and
Oh, sure.
anybody down in the Philly area would be able to see it.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks so much. And we wish you the best with your work. It's very exciting. We'd like to catch up again in another year and see where this all leads to.
Yeah, no, thank you so much.
Okay.
All right.
Have a great night.
Oh, you too.